Aaron Donald's contract, he's not retiring. No new years were added to his deal, but he got a $40 million raise over his previous contract, which carried a base salary of just $9.25 million this year. His new contract guarantees him $95 million over the next 3 years, 65 in the first two, and then 30 in year 3. So a little more in the first two, whatever. I don't know if it's exactly, 32 and a half, 32 and a half, 30, but it's $95 million over 3 years.
His 3-year cash flow is the highest in NFL history. Higher than Josh Allen, higher than Mahomes. That's what I read right before we hopped on.
Which is pretty wild, right? For an interior defensive lineman.
Yeah. I think many will consider one of the great defensive players when it's all said and done. I'd say if he has a couple more years and they make a couple more playoff runs, his resume would be pretty special.
Yeah, there was never going to be, even if he doesn't do anything else, if he had retired after 8 years, a conversation about his career length, right? When it comes to Hall of Fame candidacy.
Well, and wouldn't you say one thing he's really got going for him than, like, let's say J.J. Watt, who I would say is one of the best players of the last decade. How many playoff games J.J. really been in? A couple, right? I mean, he's lost a lot in the first round. Aaron Donald's been to multiple Super Bowls, ton of playoff games, a Super Bowl champion. Like, I've been to multiple Super Bowls, and I was the best player on both of our Super Bowl teams. I mean, I helped have the game-winning play in the NFC Championship game. Like, he has some memorable NFL moments.
Yeah.
Right? The Burrow sack. I mean,
once you win the Super Bowl on that play.
Yeah.
When
the
NFC Championship like Jamar Chase was open.
You can say back-to-back games. He won in the NFC Championship game on the final play, and he won in the Super Bowl in the final play.
Yeah. Good news for Daniel Brunskill, the Aaron Donald stopper, but bad news for everybody else.
Alex Mack's like, boo.
and good news. Yeah, I know. And good news for Nick Bosa. So, how does this affect the way you view a Nick Bosa contract?
Well, don't we look at it a little bit like Deebo with the older guys that got signed, Tyreek and Devontae? Like, Deebo doesn't have that much in common with them because he just hasn't been doing it nearly as long. Like, ultimately, Aaron Donald feels like he's been elite since the moment he got to the league, but he's definitely been elite like a year or two in and for like 6 straight years. A long period of time of like, yeah, he's locked All-Pro, Pro Bowl, and probably going to win the Defensive Player of the Year, which I think he's done 3 times. So I just don't know. I think his comp is more his brother, that contract, with like an extra little 5% inflation kicker than it is this.
Let me ask you this. If Mike Sando did his tiers list for receivers and defensive linemen, Aaron Donald would obviously be on tier 1. Would Nick Bosa be on tier 1?
I think so, yeah.
I do too. If he did his tiers list for receivers, would Deebo Samuel be on tier 1?
Probably not.
I think he'd be on tier 2.
Because don't you think a lot of people would be like, well, Kyle's not our coach. You know, it would be, who it would be. Devontae, Jamar, Justin, Tyreek might be the group, right?
Yeah. No Diggs.
He'd be a fringe one, but I think a lot of people would be like,
Kelsey?
You could probably put him there.
So
I just think
that's where I think they're a little different.
Category.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes those tiers are sometimes like there's a tier 2 that's like one guy or whatever, but
I think everyone
that's
would
where I think they're a little
Deebo's a remarkable player, but they're like, I don't know if our coach would know what to do. Nick Bosa, any coach, any scheme he could play in. He's like Khalil Mack. I think he's Joey Bosa. He's Aaron Donald. Trent Williams. I'd say Trent Williams, non-player. He'd be in tier 1 of just players. Doesn't matter the scheme. Doesn't matter what your coach asks him to do. He's going to dominate. That to me is where Nick Bosa falls under, where it's like ultimately Deebo, I think they don't want to get bent over. Like they want to feel almost like they won, or like it's a team-friendly deal, even if we're paying you a lot. I think they know they're going to wave the white flag with this guy and pay a shitload of money.
That there's not much negotiation. So the question is, what would be viewed as the right offer? $30 million a year? Especially if it's a year from now.
Don't you just do the Khalil Mack like a super long, or Aaron Donald like a 6-year extension? So
and
basically it's like
you're in this
8 years.
position.
Yeah.
Whereas like 5 years in, you're like 4 years in, you go, oh yeah, okay, $30 million. Now you're being underpaid. We'll give you a little bit of a raise. But we're not. That's what you liked about the Aaron Donald deal, right? Is that you're not adding any years to it. It's expensive, but you're not tying yourself in any longer.
Because remember, we talked about it's a shitty spot for them if they got to rip it up and give them a new $120 million deal and tie themselves 5 years. That's not what this is. This is actually probably one of the easier contracts the Rams have ever signed. I just add
because it
money
was
to
a
your
simple,
existing deal.
and it was as simple as, do we want him back or not? Because if we want him back, this is what it's going to cost.
Yeah. They want him back.
And they want him back. They need him back.
Yeah. But the 49ers, they are very, very dependent on. I was like, what number's Nick Bosa?
Just think 97.
97, yeah. He's pretty key to what they do. He's an elite player. I mean, he's pretty special. And that's just in that position, where George Kittle gets screwed, Nick Bosa, if you're a good pass rusher, you strike oil.
Well, if you said to Kyle Shanahan, you can keep one, and the other one's gone,
I don't even think he'd hesitate.
You think he'd take Nick Bosa
over 19?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you put a gun to his head and said, like, you have to trade one right now, Deebo would get traded.
Here's the thing. I think if you said both of them will give you 6 more great years, in that scenario, I think he might take Deebo. I would consider Deebo in that scenario because he's so unique. He's so hard to replace.
I would not, just because it's not so much easier. It's easier for me to find an offensive weapon than it is a pass rusher. They just don't exist, guy.
Yeah, you have to get in the top 3.
Not on an all-pro level.
Yeah, but I think you could also argue maybe they're a little overvalued on the 49ers team that like produces 5th round defensive lineman kind of playmakers.
What if like, I'm just going to throw this out there. He's claimed doesn't want to be a defensive coordinator, but what if let's just assume he's from the South, and I told you, NC State offers Chris Kasurek the head coaching job, or just something like, there's just not a guarantee that you're just keeping him for life.
Right.
Like, you are very dependent on that human being. Like, you lose him, wouldn't you say it would be pretty, like, I'm going to assume he's not going to become a defensive coordinator because he said that. But like, I don't know what college, what if there's like a program offered him a head job? I don't know. We've seen crazier.
And you could argue if you're a head coach who controls one side of the ball, you should overcorrect on the other side of the ball, right? Like Andy Reid should spend the most money on his non-quarterback, most money on a defensive star because he can't control that side of the ball. You could argue that. I guess my ultimate point is, like, I don't think it would be as crazy as it sounds with Deebo. And what it illuminates to me is part of the question with Deebo is, can you do this for 6 more years? Because I think with Nick Bosa, there's not really much. Can you do what Nick Bosa does for 6 more years? Yes. The answer to that question is yes, you can.
He went to Texas Tech, and he's from Texas. Now, Texas Tech they clearly just got a new coach because they fired Matt Wells last year.
Yeah, they hired Sonny Cumbie, I think.
Yeah. No clue who that is, but I mean, they hired kind of a random guy. But my point is, like, what if Texas Tech, K-State, one of those type programs where he's from, you just never know. He'd become a head coach and pay him $5 million a year. Maybe not, $4 million a year.
Yeah.
He's making a ton now. He's got a good gig. That to me is the only way you lose him. But I don't feel that confident that, like, I don't think you can just pencil in like Chris Kasurik's going to be their defensive line coach as long as Kyle Shanahan. Like,
yeah, devalue the talent you get because you have Chris Kasurek and you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's fair. I think they're very, very lucky. And sometimes, like the Eagles, they took Stoutland from Alabama right when I got fired. He's their offensive line coach a decade later, and probably is the highest paid offensive line coach in the league. Jeff Stoutland, yeah, and he's elite. I mean, they took the rugby guy, turned him into a premium tackle. I would say that's kind of an outlier. Like, how many, if we went around the league and we just like, who are the top 10 position coaches? But most of them haven't been on their team longer than 3 or 4 years, right?
Well, I mean, how long was Dante Scarnecchia in one place?
But I'd say he's a clear outlier.
But the top 10 position coaches are all outliers.
Yeah, but they usually get opportunities to become coordinators.
Yeah.
He would be number one. He retired, and he was, I think many would say he was a huge key to their success. Howard Mudd. It does happen sometimes with line guys because one thing,
become coaches, head coaches,
and they don't necessarily they get paid a shitload of money. A lot of times they sneaky get paid like coordinators, and they just kind of love their unit, like more than their family. Like they truly like, resonate with those guys in a weird way, like more than any other human beings that they'll ever meet in their life.
They just want to be in their little bubble.
They just want to be with like their 8 guys in the trenches. They're able to scream unfiltered. There's just not. It's remember Jonathan Martin when he like freaked out. The reason that was such a big deal is you never see like offensive linemen like not be able to take it, you know, and that it's just usually offensive and defensive linemen. Part of the gig is like we're gonna get our ass chewed every day. Trent Williams like, yeah, I don't even listen. You know, he just yells. I just block.
He's not yelling at me.
Yeah, he probably isn't getting yelled at. How often do you think Trent Williams has been yelled at in the last like 5 years of his playing career?
I mean, less than 5 times.
All
the drills that require yelling, they sit Trent out of them anyway, probably. So
how many times do you think like Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack been yelled at in the last like 5 years? Khalil maybe every once.
Khalil a little bit more.
When's the last time Aaron Donald's been like called out by a coach?
You think Brandon Staley was screaming at him?
No.
So $30 million over 6 years, since you said the Khalil Mack contract is $180 million.
I think the 49ers would do a long-term contract with Bosa, don't you? And just spread the cash out.
Yeah.
With Deebo, I think they would do the opposite. They would try to just like, let's just get it in right now and see what happens.
And if we pay him again in 3 years, fine.
I get the risk.
He's not going to want less than 4 years.
I think it's going to get pretty ugly. You could argue maybe it's going to get uglier.
Excuse him before you start talking. Because you're right. Because the point is you haven't, maybe what set him off was the first offer. Has there not been a discussion since then about what this is going to cost and how much they want to pay? Right.
What would your reaction be tomorrow at practice if Deebo walked over and got behind Grant and started messing with him?
Is Grant pro pay him or anti pay him?
You know, if you're anti Deebo Samuel, I think we got to question whether you know what you're talking about. I think everyone I've ever seen talk about Deebo Samuel is pretty pro Deebo as a player.
Well, it's hard to be pro Deebo too, because no one's suggesting you make him the highest paid receiver, right?
Part of it, yeah. But like, are we talking John Robinson to AJ Brown? Can we get you for $16 million?
What if he gets a text like on his way out to the field? Glad you're there. Thanks for showing up. You know, from his agent. Just talked to Parag. We just talked first offer 19.5 per year. Like as he's walking out, and then he sees John Lynch. Like John.
I would love a good contract negotiation on the field. I bet that
Uber's a helicopter to pick him up from the practice field.
I feel like that happened probably more in the 70s, 80s, and maybe even the 90s of just like, fuck you, man. You ain't pay. Just that is so less likely to happen now. And I'd pay money to see a blow up.
Shanahan hits him with you got to talk to John Lynch about that. I got nothing to do with it, Deebo.
Yeah.
Deebo's like, I know you call the shots.
I know you're the decision maker. I know it starts and ends with you, Kyle. I put my trust in you. You put your trust in me, and now you're screwing me. I got someone sent me some text messages that you sent another agent. They took a screenshot because that happens now.
I saw what happened to AJ.
I know you told John Robinson he did a good deal and that you like Traylon Burks too, and you thought about it.
Kyle's like, you want to be a Jet? You want to be a Jet?
And the whole place is going silent.